información habitual y vamos a poner el foco en los próximos minutos en Brasil, en los mercados emergentes, que a veces pecamos de meter a los mercados emergentes en la misma bolsa y bien es cierto que la casuística de cada uno de ellos es muy distinta. Ahora mismo, aunque Bolsonaro no haya querido reconocer abiertamente esa derrota en las elecciones brasileñas, la victoria de Lula Da Silva es indiscutible. Lula se alza como presidente de Brasil y vamos a analizar a continuación las grandes implicaciones para los mercados y su economía. Hablamos con Xavier Hovasse, es responsable de renta variable emergente de Carmignac. Xavier, thank you so much for having us a few minutes. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What can we expect in Brazilian equity markets after the victory of Lula Da Silva?
I think the Brazilian equity market should behave well because the outcome is quite positive. But one thing which is very interesting is that in the European press, I mean, in Spain, in France, in the UK, we only talked about Lula's victory. But in reality, on the same day, on October the 2nd, on the same day as the first round, you also had a third of the Senate to be renewed, the lower house to be entirely renewed, and also the big regional elections. And the outcome of those elections was favorable to Bolsonaro, the right-wing parties. They secured a majority at the Congress, centrist and right-wing parties. So you had a situation which is the most bullish for Brazilian equities, because on one hand, you have Lula. The internationals like Lula. It's not that they like Lula, but it's more like they didn't like Bolsonaro, because Bolsonaro was perceived, rightfully by the way, as very environmental unfriendly, which is not the case for Lula. So international investors are okay with Lula. When he was president between 2002 and 2010, Brazilian assets performed well. The Brazilian economy performed well. He was very pragmatic. He was not, a Chavez kind of leftist leader. But on top of that, the fact that the Congress is going to be centrist, the implication of that means that even if Lula wanted to be very extreme in his socialist policies, he wouldn't be able to do so. So a lot of the promises that Lula made during his campaign are not going to be possible. He won't be able to reverse the privatization of Eletrobras, which is the big utilities which was state-owned. He said during the campaign he wanted to reverse the privatization. He can't do it now, because for that he would need to change the law, and he can't change the law because he doesn't control the Congress. That's why we were very bullish into the election, because it was very clear that Lula was not going to be able to secure a majority in the Congress. And also remember that he picked as a vice president Geraldo Alckmin. Geraldo Alckmin is the governor of the state of São Paulo. He belongs to the Central. The Central in Brazil is the big centrist alliance of parties. So you have probably orthodox fiscal and monetary policy ahead. And Brazil looks good because they are somehow beneficiaries of the war in Ukraine, because they export commodities. Brazil is the #1 exporter in the world of soy, sugar, meat. They also export oil. So the fact that we have a big spike in commodity prices has improved dramatically Brazil's terms of trade. So the currency should be well behaved, and the economy is doing well in Brazil. I mean, this year the economy grew almost 3%, which was unexpected at the start of the year, and this has a lot to do with the fact that agriculture was very strong. So Brazil looks quite good. You have a benign political scenario. You have good commodity prices, and something else. One last important feature is that the Brazilian central bank has been very orthodox. So when European Union and the Fed, the ECB in Europe and the Fed in the US were having negative real rates, and sending checks to the population like Donald Trump and Biden or even Macron. At the same time, the Brazilian central bank was hiking rates. They hiked rates from 2% to currently 13.75%, and you have one of the highest real rates in the world, above 4%. And it's the case on all the Brazilian curve. So they're going to cut rates. When everyone in the world is talking about hiking rates, which is hurting markets, Brazil is going to do the exact opposite. They are going to cut rates, which is very supportive for Brazilian equities.
Really interesting. Does the Brazilian central bank have more room for action if we compare it with the ECB or the Federal Reserve, for example?
Yes, because they are inflation. The big problem is inflation. But Brazil, inflation is has behaved much better recently. So, for example, the last two inflation data points that we've had for the last 2 months, on September and October, inflation was negative on a month-on-month basis. So inflation has started to decline. So where everywhere else in the world, particularly in the US, they have an inflationary problem which is more persistent than initially thought. In Brazil, it's the exact opposite. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the currency, the Brazilian real, has been very strong. It's almost the best performing currency this year. It's one of the few currencies that appreciated against the US dollar. The US dollar is a very strong currency, as we saw with its appreciation against the euro, but the real, the Brazilian real, appreciated against the dollar. So it's really a very strong currency. So then when you import prices go down, so it's a deflationary force. So they have a lot of room. The market expects 3% of interest rate cuts in Brazil next year. We think it's going to be closer to 5%, which is why, the central bank has a lot of room. And the central banker is Roberto Campos is very, very orthodox and very good. He has a very good reputation. We have a very high esteem of him.
Thank you so much, Xavier Hovasse from Carmignac, for bringing to us this picture, this framework of the reality of Brazilian markets and economy. It's very interesting. Thank you so much. Pleasure.
Merci beaucoup.
Nosotros, por tanto, nos